Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Rachael, I want to ask you a question. I'm not sure I've ever asked you, but let me set up why I'm asking you in a moment. And that is, I'm going to ask you, how would some of your very good friends describe you? I don't want you to come to this series without at least having a few seconds to ponder that. How would your good friends describe you? And equally, I'll attempt to do the same. But I also want you to hear from me the words I would use to describe you, and I would ask the same. I want you to do the same. So here's the question. Are we aware when we walk into a room, when we're interacting with a friend or a stranger, that the impact we have is related to a kind of gravity we each bring into the world? And we're going to call that a style of relating. And gravity, in some sense, as I have at least looked at Wikipedia, says that it's basically related to mass and movement. How thick are you? And how quickly do you move in the world? And on the basis of that, there is a kind of gravitas, a gravity that shapes the effect we have on other people. And this notion of style of relating basically boils down to, if you don't know the impact you make in the world, then you're going to continue to have an effect, but without ever being able to shape it to a better good, or without having a heart to actually engage it where it's really problematic. So we're into this category, style of relating. How would your good friends describe you?
Well, it's a great question. I think they would say I'm watchful. I'm like very nurturing and kind, but also fierce. Those are some words, I think, if someone just at a first glance that knows me well was asked, these are some words that would come to mind.
That's hilarious. Yes, I would say, as a friend of yours, do you want me to offer you my words?
Yeah, I want to hear them.
Well, and I'm only going to give you sort of three, but I would say the first word is loyal. I don't know anybody who would take more of a bullet for friends than you would. And the second word I had was fierce. So at least we've got some significant overlap. And the third word, and if you need me to define it, I know that you know the word, but it's sort of a word we don't use a lot. And I would use the word mercurial.
Wow. I do need you to define it.
Well, it really comes from the notion of Mercury or Hermes. It's Mercury, Hermes. Mercury was the Roman god. Hermes was the Greek god, and it's really the god who's the god of a messenger, the hermeneutics, the ability to read, interpret. But usually the word mercurial means somewhat intense, erratic, volatile, compelling, but with a message that can't be dismissed. And so, yeah, my friend, you are mercurial.
That's a really good word. I'm going to have to ponder and play with that a little bit. That's robust. It's a robust word. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So,
well, you tell me. I would love to hear from you. How do you think your friends would describe you?
Well, I think most people would say intense, probably combative, or drawn to conflict, and probably complex.
I think
and the words you would.
I think those are very accurate words. And I also want to fight you a little bit on the 3-word limit, because I feel like that's not sufficient. But I'm trying to stick within the boundaries you've given me, even though I do feel like pressing beyond them.
Press. Hey, you're the co-host, girl.
It's interesting because a lot of the words I had for you started with the letter P. But I would say, maybe this feels like connected to combative, but like this provocative playfulness, like a movement toward people, toward the human heart that both provokes a response and an engagement, but is moving in this very playful invitation toward goodness. I think you have you are very precise, and I mean that in the way you relate. Like there's a precision, and I think I would say intensity in that precision, both in timeliness, in getting to the heart of the matter, like with almost like a surgeon kind of precision. You are devoted. And I think when I think about the word devoted, I think about loyalty, but I think about a commitment to calling and to saying yes, and productive. I think there is a productivity in devotion that feels very true of you. And then I did have like a fourth and fifth word. One, brilliant. I think you are very brilliant. And also one of the kindest people I know. So there is a kindness in the midst of this. So,
well, I'm at one level, I love being with you, but at this moment, I'm kind of glad we're not face to face. I find myself very near tears. I think that's the effect when you are read well. Mm-hmm. And there is attunement. And we are going to be intersecting in this series on style of relating and the fact that we all have a history of how we were formed in those core relationships in our family or attachment, and also the effect. And it's interesting. My words of myself are a little harsher. Uh-huh. Your words speak with more generosity, but also with a lot of overlap and truth. So let's start with this. As much as I really am very taken and touched by your words, the fact is we know one another. Yeah. There are themes that play out as a friend, as a colleague, as interacting even with different gender, age, and sense of calling. We know each other. And when you know someone, you know something about the gravity that their life brings. And even if it changes to some degree contextually on the basis of like a role or who you're in the presence of or audience or your setting, look, role, audience, setting changes a lot of how we relate. But there is something of consistency thematically that's true of every human life.
No, this feels so accurate. And I think is part of what can help us move out of this sense of like, we all know our intentions, right? And our intent in the way we want to be in the world. But I think so few of us actually have done the hard work to let there be mirrors back to us with people we trust, to be curious about who we are and how we've come to be who we are, to own something of our impact. I love that language of gravity, like gravitas. And the reality is, especially those of us who proclaim to be Christian, we have a keen sense that this kind of consistency in how we impact those around us, or something of our essence, our way of being, always involves the intersection of beauty and brokenness. Involves how we invite or call others to move into our being, how we engage others, what our capacity for intimacy is, and it also involves how we keep others at bay, how we navigate and manage our fear and our shame and our contempt. And the reality is, like, that's why even you using a word like you would describe your friends would describe you as complex is so true, I think, of all of us. There is so much complexity, and we are very dynamic people that like bear many stories that have shaped who we are and how we relate. And the more we can get out of the fragility of needing to be either all good or all bad, and start to be curious about who we are and how we impact others. I think we have a lot more freedom then to play. As long as we're always watching, I would say those boundary marks of like never using the knowledge or awareness we have of ourselves as an end in of itself. Like, well, just deal with it. This is who I am. Like it's somehow static or solidified.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So make sure you hear us. We're not saying that you're a given and you can't change. We are saying in so many ways that you are a grain, like on wood, and that wood, different seasons create a different level of a grain, and that grain's going to be determined by so much of what's happening around you. And so we do have an effect, but we cannot change entirely the way we relate in the world. And when you were talking about brokenness and beauty, literally my beauty invites you in, but my brokenness in so many ways is sort of like a hand pushing back against your movement into my world. And that's the complexity, that all our styles of relating are an intersection between our invitation for people to hear and see what's within us, while already a push way back because I'm not sure anyone in my world truly can be trusted with the level of fragility and raw reality that I happen to know exists within me at almost any moment.
Oh, it's like there's such a painful truth to that. And I think so many of us, like, here's an example. This is kind of an extreme example, but my husband, Michael, and I we're currently in New Hampshire to do some work, and we were at a little restaurant at an inn and sitting by the fireplace at a table, and a woman came up and pretty much just demanded to be in our space and had the whole wait staff kind of up in arms, and they had to move her, and she needed to bring more confrontation. And this is such an extreme example, but as I was pondering where we were going, I thought this must be her interactions everywhere she goes. There's probably always some chaos that is around her, intrusion of boundaries, and probably, unless she's in really good care, just almost like a sense of like, why is violence always happening to me? Why are people always cruel to me? Why is everyone always, in some ways, disinviting me? And I think sometimes we can look at extreme cases of people's style of relating when it's so in our face and be like, that person. But yet don't want to be curious about the thematic ways people react to us. Like that, maybe we might have something to do with that. That might actually be something, an essence we are bringing into the space.
Oh, so important to hear that we do have a gravitational pull, and it's going to be consistent enough over scene, setting, people, audience, and more often than not, we are blind to it because we've either justified it like a phrase like, oh, that's just my personality, or we give it a category that sounds insightful and often is good, like, oh, well, on the Enneagram, I'm a 7 or an 8 or a 9, or on the Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ or an INTJ. And please, for the people who love that, I'm all for ways to codify the way we enter into the world. But on the other hand, what it doesn't take into account is that we're not a given at birth. We didn't come into the world as an 8 or as an ENTJ. We come into the world with a certain set of biological givens, but we are deeply impacted by both the beauty and brokenness of our moms and dads and our families and the particular culture that we're in. Absolutely. And this is where it gets painful, because to actually begin to say, look, if my mom and dad are sinners, that means, as Jesus says, they struggle with lust and anger. Nobody escapes being called a sinner. And if they're sinners, then their own lust, adultery, their own anger murder got played out with me and everybody else in the family. And so we're not trying to attack families. We're not attacking mothers and fathers, because I happen to be a father and a grandfather. But my style of relating affects everybody in my family, sometimes for great good, and at times with great heartache.
Well, and again, this is that sense of, I think so many people think, oh, healing looks like somehow transforming, shifting, changing my style of relating. And I think it's more nuanced than that. I think it's like, no, what are the beautiful gifts that come from your style of relating that have been born in suffering, that need, in some ways, you need healing in the places where they have been used to shield you or protect you from harm in a way that's actually now prohibiting you from loving well. And I think the hermeneutic and the frame for how we discern if our style of relating is actually becoming more Christ-like is, how does it then actually help us to love and to give love and receive love well. So you can't actually throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like you've got to step into the complex, heartache and textures of who you are, and let something be born again, be made new. That is actually a great gift you give to the world. Like, you used the word loyal for me, and I think my loyalty, again, has such goodness that it offers when it's not bound to fear, when it's not bound to defensiveness and self-protection. But both exist in the midst of that style of relating.
Absolutely. And so just as your ferocity, my intensity can actually intimidate and push people away, it can also be the basis of coming into burning buildings that most people don't want to engage for the sake of being able to do good rescue and care. So we're really inviting you as a listener to hold the reality that your life has an effect, a profound effect, of both good and ill, of brokenness and beauty. But it's so important for you to see the effect, because it's going to allow you to, in some sense, to taste how others experience you. And in that, maybe your heart will be a little kinder to them, and maybe, frankly, a little bit kinder to yourself.
Because there's such an invitation to then ponder how we came to be who we are. If there's an acknowledgement that you have a particularity to the way you engage and that it wasn't formed in a vacuum, then you get to step into the work of being curious as to how you came to be who you are, which then I do think has the double-sided impact of being able to invite you to grow your curiosity of how others came to be who they are.
And maybe we're far afield, but to say again, the way we are in the world is part of the calling of revealing Jesus. My brokenness and my beauty is part of revealing his death and resurrection. So if I don't know the impact I have, almost in every setting, I will not be able to use my body, my heart, my face, my very being to somehow make known the very goodness of what I most want to reveal to people. And that's the love of God. So it really does give us something to have handles on, not just to change, but in many ways, as you put it so well, to ponder, to reflect, to actually be in some sense of appropriate awe that I am the way I am, and that I can become more of who I'm meant to be.
Absolutely. And therefore, how I'm meant to love. And I think it gives us a language for pursuing repair, which we'll talk more about when we get into some of the details of attachment, for pursuing relationships being made right when there has been harm. So really just a different language for reconciliation, to actually give us some of the playground and the dirt to do the work of reconciliation in the midst of.
So to say it again, and you've said it well, but the goal is not to change our style of relating, but to author our way of being, to grow the glory and goodness of others, of ourselves, and in a communion together that calls you to be more who you're meant to be, rather than just going, oh, well, that's just his personality. That's just the way he is. Just accept him as he is and learn to kind of get around the rough spots, enjoy the good ones. Now, we're not looking in this particular world for just getting along. No. We actually believe, at least some days, I believe in redemption. Yeah. And that requires us to come to ourselves. And if the category of the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, horoscopes, I don't care what, helps you see who you are, make sure you're seeing who you are in light of your story, both the heartache, but also the beauty of your story. And then we can begin to open the door to this, I think, beautiful next category, and that is, how does attachment, really the history of our earliest learning classroom, those eras between like our birth and 3, 4, 5 years of age, how do they shape our way of being and our style of relating? And that's what we're going to step into and at least explore a bit more on our next episode.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.